Why don't I'm going to do about, try 10 minutes of question and answer before I roll into anything. Because, basically I don't really know where you're at. This process for me has been a 3-year journey so far. I'm a family physician, but I've had some activism and stuff like that. And I know that there's just a lot of information out there. So maybe if you might be willing, it's not a bad way of kind of learning how to be a little bit assertive anyhow. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to bring up, and maybe we can chat for a minute? I'm going to start with you, since you're moving along. Do you have any, this is your thing. Is there anything that has come to mind that you would like to say, hey, why not this, or what's our goals, or that type of thing?
I really want to focus on advocacy, and my heart's there in social justice and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to come up with a plan. I mean, one of the things I expressed in one of my papers for this class was the deep concern I have. It seems like Kentucky is getting on track with really fighting back with the heroin epidemic,
mm-hmm.
and with addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest concern is Ohio,
mm-hmm.
because a lot of people are coming from Kentucky to go over to Ohio to purchase the heroin,
mm-hmm.
and then coming back, and we're so close. We need to forget about that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, for the future, want to see Kentucky and Ohio working together to have a plan. And I'm kind of like, my heart, and I've even told, my husband this, my heart is kind of like, if I had the money, or if I could do some grant writing or
mm-hmm.
anything,
mm-hmm.
I would love to see a center for addictions, especially treating heroin, because I just don't think it's there. I mean, I think it's there, but when Dr. Kalfas came,
mm-hmm.
I am in so agreement with a lot of what he talked about,
mm-hmm.
and his paradigm of
mm-hmm.
treatment,
mm-hmm.
because we've talked about in class that some of these centers, just a week, even a week, 4 or 5 days is not enough. It's not enough to get that treatment, because with having the heroin, the addiction, it's so strong and it causes so much brain damage, it's powerful. And we really need to look at the overall health, the emotionally and physically, which I am a firm believer in, of how to treat that person. And so I really would like to do that. And I also am big in, I do jail ministry. And so I'm really big on also trying to help people who are incarcerated,
mm-hmm.
which a lot of people who are incarcerated should not be incarcerated, I feel, because of addictions.
Mm-hmm.
That's why our jails are overcrowded, and I really would like to have a center to help with, somehow tie that in, so we don't have a high amount of recidivism, with people just going back to jail, going back to jail, going back to jail, because they have a hard time. They can't find employment, they're addicted, the addictions are strong. So that's kind of where my heart is, and I'm going to fight and do whatever I can to see what I can do for the future.
Well, I think everything you said was correct. You've thought this through, and I agree with you. First thing is, I will, you're all proactive in this proactive stage and a proactive career. I will give you each one of my cards with my email. And at some point, if I can help you direct your interest to the right connections, to the right people, I would be more than happy to help you. Obviously, Jason and Bonnie are already set up to do that, but I can maybe give you a little bit further guidance. One of the things that you touched on is, I'm going to start off just discussing Kentucky, and I'm going to speak about Northern Kentucky specifically, because that's probably the easiest for me to wrap my brain around, versus Ohio, which I mean greater Cincinnati, and outside of that. First thing is, I'm not an addiction specialist. I kind of got this serendipitously, like Dr. Kalfas did, where Dr. Kalfas just happened to be next to Falmouth, and they needed to hire somebody. I fell into heroin because Northern Kentucky fell into heroin. meaning that I just noticed that my patients were all the family members were being hit by this, and that was August of 2012. Heroin is slightly different. Every addiction and every, so my point is, addiction is not addiction. I mean, there are addictive personalities, there's addictive substances. I would suppose that addiction to alcohol looks and has the same flavor as maybe addiction to heroin or cocaine or overuse of marijuana or cigarettes. There's a lot of overlap. It just so happens that heroin just happens to be really, really powerful bad. It just happens to be one of those ones where we kind of use kind of the black swan type of thing. It's big, hit big. We weren't prepared for it, and we're still not prepared for it. If you look at the bigger picture of addiction, the United States, probably the world, particularly places like Kentucky, have used the concept of the war on drugs as the paradigm, which is more of a just say no, classic Reagan, throw people in jail, and then what that's the institutionalized component of it. Then you have a cultural component that is probably associated with the traditional recovery movement that comes out of the AA movement for alcohol. That was a very reasonable concept that has a certain amount of behavioral aspects, a lot of cultural aspects, and a certain amount of, basically fraternity. Let's do it together on our own, and let's fight alcohol through having a different way of seeing the world among ourselves. What happened was my prediction, my explanation of heroin is obviously the Iraq-Afghanistan war set us up for that, just like the Vietnam War. Wars set people up. It's a different international aspect. Afghanistan obviously was the heroin epicenter. That then they kind of pushed heroin into all parts of the world. Less so here, but to here also, because that's where I was coming from. And then what happened was that we got our appetites whetted again with heroin. And then I will call them the Mexican cartels, but I'm sure that there's other cartels involved, realized that the economics of marijuana was going to go down. You can get better, cheaper marijuana from Colorado than you can from Mexico. So their portfolio, since it's a narco state for much of it, just like Procter & Gamble says, we have to diversify our portfolio. So heroin became easier and smarter for them to promote it. And they did it quickly to an unprepared community. It's very interesting. I heard from an African-American gentleman who basically said, our people aren't going to do heroin because we remember. The populations out here didn't really have that, I'm not going to use heroin. It transitioned right from the drop in pills, because House Bill 1 decreased the amount of pills that we had, and that was just the margin of the pills, but the pills dropped it, and then you went right into heroin. So the reason why I bring all that up is I want you to understand that the context of addiction, in my mind, I'm not coming from it that I'm an addiction specialist and that it's just rolling through, that you have alcohol, whatever new addiction. When it comes to heroin, this was the one that changed the game changer for addiction. And probably because originally most people hit by addiction were slightly marginalized. The medical system the traditional medical model didn't really care as much. There's medical people who are kind of semi-predatorial and not necessarily prepared to deal with the medicine of addiction. But heroin looks different than alcohol, looks different from cocaine, looks different from other types of things, because in general, it's worse. Also, relatively useful substitutes, i.e., if you look at medicine-assisted treatment, methadone, Suboxone, and Vivitrol, all for the right match, can act as a barrier between that really strong, I have to have heroin today, versus I don't. So what I'm going to say is that because you have a huge devastation, a new population that is not just those people, but includes the traditional middle class families that weren't quite being hit, and the fact that you actually can develop a medical model that works relatively well in conjunction with a medical model that includes the traditional adjunct treatments, therapy, behavioral health stuff. This will, in my mind, be the place where the war on drugs is finally tilting towards a treatment on drugs. So what you have to understand is that one of the reasons why Northern Kentucky was particularly hit is that we didn't have the medical capacity to address heroin here, because some communities actually have doctors who are providing Suboxone, had methadone clinics up and running. Some states actually pay for methadone with Medicaid. And then the Vivitrol is just kind of new. So Northern Kentucky happened to be a funny place in our country where it got hit a little bit earlier, a little harder because it's along that 75 corridor. We didn't have the infrastructure, or we had the wrong mixture of solutions. And the good thing about that is we have a relatively good group of individuals who get it, who are here, and they're all working together to address all the different aspects of the epidemic. So my point is, if we just continued this pathway of where we are right now, of addressing the fact that we need to have, if you need to have a place for detoxing patients who are at very high risk, if you're going to put them on Vivitrol, you need to have adequate number of doctors providing Suboxone. You need to have methadone covered by Medicaid. You need to have a wraparound situation. You need to have a cultural shift where you're preventing individuals from even going in that pathway early on, and you're addressing how you can start reducing the risk and improving the resiliency. You need to have the naloxone provided for those people who are who are going to use anyhow. And then you need to have a system where you're trying to figure out how do you get people out of jail and more into the transitioning towards getting their life in order, giving them housing, giving them transportation, giving them the opportunity to rebuild their lives, with the understanding that unfortunately heroin is one of those things that as soon as you think you got it right, they're going to screw it up, because that's the way it is, right? What you're seeing, the difference between Ohio or the rest of this country maybe, is that we have a relatively, if you were to, I could easily make a phone call to a half dozen to a dozen to more individuals who are all have taken on responsibility to address one or two or more aspects. Going back to Charlotte with Casey's Law, she was the first person to actually say, well, this is something that needs to be addressed. I'm going to take responsibility to focus on one thing, and I'm going to become a relative expert on that one thing, and I'm going to find other people, we're going to work on it together until we get it done. Jason, for example, has become an expert in lots of areas, but naloxone was the area that he kind of focused on. So, what it goes back to when you're comparing, and this kind of hits your the cross the river thing, Ohio in some ways is ahead of Kentucky because they actually have certain resources and certain things that they're doing properly. In some ways, they're behind because the advantage we have in northern Kentucky is that we started from scratch, and then all the people who were trying to work out together found each other, and there wasn't anybody, one group of people who really had it all figured out. So,
It's been a long process.
yes, is there, off of trail off of that conversation, does anybody want to ask me a question off of hers, or that I brought up, or anything off of what I said? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to focus on the after treatment, the support for those individuals who are in recovery who, like you said, need to get their life on track, need a job, need a home, need transportation to get back and forth to work.
I think that is, the right answer to do, to focus on. And I will tell you, for example, I know Jason's worked with, we've been bouncing around how to make that happen for a while, because it's obviously that kind of elusive. How do you get paid for that? How do you organize that? How do you make that happen? There's a gentleman named Paul Kamrick, and Paul and I have been talking a lot recently, and one of the things that I'm going to be working with him on is, so there's a couple of different things. There's some recent training programs that Medicaid will actually cover. That one is a peer support. I think that's been around for a while, but Medicaid will actually allow you to do some peer support work, and then also there is the concept of the caseworker through Medicaid, and and there's different institutions like Transitions and North Key and those institutions that are already doing that. One of the things I was bouncing around with Paul the other day was, St. Elizabeth, we just opened up our addiction clinic, which is actually quite an accomplishment if you think that a nonprofit, large institution is actually going to get in the mix, right? And the thing that we have to do is maybe come up with a plan to say, well, what would this look like? And then maybe try to raise money through their foundation to do that. And it's probably not an extraordinarily expensive process, in the sense that if you find people who are both doing things as a passion, getting a little bit of a stipend to pay for some of their things like phone calls and transportation, really what these people need are benign people around them to support themselves, their families, and to make sure that they show up to their meetings, take their medication, have a place to live, kind of acting like what you would think a social worker should be doing anyhow, right? So, heroin and the addicted life completely destroys that. I will tell you, once you get people into treatment that's working for them, it gives the huge opportunity to restore normal behavior, and that includes all those things. So,
Feel that, okay, they went to rehab and they spent 6 months there, they open the door and say, see you later.
And that's ineffective, right?
What do? They've estranged themselves from their families and friends, and, because they've lied and stole and cheated and done whatever they had to do to get their drug. So, a lot of people don't have a place to go to and don't have that support.
You're hired. Okay, so the answer is that is exactly, when I was as a family physician, and as a parent, as a man, a male, who pays attention, is surrounded by women. And I notice that women and there's obviously some differences between us, right? But one of the things I noticed one of the greatest differences I noticed about between men and women were that men had a typical habit of looking at the big things and focusing on big things. And women focused on everything, good or bad, right? And one of the things I noticed was this concept. Say you're a parent and you get your kid into that, you live in a nice neighborhood and you have a nice car and it's a good school. A guy would say that's enough. A woman would think, well, yeah, but if I don't pick up my kid on time and I leave my kid sitting there for the next hour, or I don't have the right appropriate clothing for the rainy day, they're going to think I'm a bad parent. And in general, when it comes to things like treating heroin, that's the same thing. I need to have the right detox center. I need to have the right medication. I need to have the right therapist. I need to have the right behavior from the judicial system. But I also just need to make sure that that patient or individual has an opportunity to get a ride to their treatment, get a drive to their job, maybe to their group, has a little sense that they have a little bit that somebody's talking to them, is taking their medication. The small things matter, if not more. You have to have the whole package to win. Our society has fought that concept because it's fairly paternalistic. It requires you to cross over and say, it's not just their responsibility, it's my responsibility to make sure that they go there. Because guess what? They're not going to do it right for a while. And then even once they do it right, you can't trust them. The Reagan era of trust but verify. With heroin is don't trust and verify. You can love them or not. You can like them or not, but you should never trust them. Okay, because heroin is, I'm not a religious person, but if you're going to get close to the devil, it is. It makes good people do the wrong thing almost every time. At some point, of their people's health and well-being, I think that changes. But the problem is when you're talking about a population and you're talking your loved one, the stakes are high. So I think that the things of trying to activate the way I would address your thought is this. I think you can do a lot of work on I think the phrase is AmPro, amateur pro, kind of paraprofessional. So you have people who are going to go through their careers and they're going to actually get licensed and they're going to make a living at this. This is what they're going to do full time. I think there are people out there who can probably do stuff, make a little bit of money, do it as a secondary passion like a lay minister, and have some authority, have some training, and just do the right thing and maybe just get enough money to make it so that they can break even. I think if that process occurs, we'll win. I think it's a combination of the two. There needs to be some formalization of it so that people are safe, doing the right thing, not just using, we should use some evidence-based concepts versus this is just what I learned because I read it and this is what I believe in. We got to get beyond that a little bit.
Absolutely. It's critical.
To actually do the right thing. Okay, you have any questions? None? Okay, you probably have questions.
Well, I was going to ask about treatment.
Yes.
And how much of it is behavior modification and how much of it is healing the damage that the drug addiction does to the brain? How much of it is...
Yeah, so I will tell you in my career, as you get farther into any clinical career, you'll learn that there are some truths that are kind of broad, but every individual's different. And they're different at different times. And then on top of that, what you must understand is the individuals who go through this are often lying to themselves and to you, so you really don't have a good understanding until after you find out, meaning what you think you know, you probably are wrong about. What I would tell you is that I can only tell you what I know about heroin honestly, partially from talking to other people's and their families, but probably now from just having my own patients and being in practice and having I had the opportunity to treat up to 30 patients simultaneously with Suboxone. During that time, some have made it, done exceptionally well. It's kind of a bell-shaped curve, really. Exceptionally well, exceptionally bad, and everybody else in the middle. What I mean by exceptionally well is this. All I needed to do is drop Suboxone in their mouth, give them the medicine, and they're done. That's all they needed. Their life just went back to normal. They got it figured out. And I believe in that. I've seen it. You give them the medication, and I think this might be the case for some people with Vivitrol, but it's too early because I just started using it. I've seen people with methadone, but I'm not taking care of them. So heroin, and since I've never been addicted to heroin, the closest thing I have to addiction probably is that I like to drink alcohol now that I've gotten older. I didn't start off that way. Probably the other one is that I've been in relationships with women that I couldn't stop thinking about, and and I will tell you that when I used cocaine, I really enjoyed it. When I was a kid, I tried cocaine out, but my gut feeling is maybe there's some physiologic explanations that are maybe a little bit more interesting. If you're really hungry and you have no food and just enough or you're thirsty or you have to go to the bathroom, and that's all you can think about, you're on the, that's it, right? It's a physiologic, I have to have it. It owns your automatic brain. And unfortunately, the automatic brain is hard to train. And some people, their automatic brain has been trained to be addicted, and some aren't. My dad has no addictions. Doesn't just, he likes eating food a little bit, but he can still run off of it. Zero addictions. Never seen him. Probably drank more than, 4 bottles of wine his entire life, and 2, whatever. No, just not addictive personality. And then there's some people who are just hardwired for addiction. They are just built for addiction. And I suspect that that's a genetic pathway that comes from evolution. I truly believe that alcohol addiction comes from the fact that we needed alcohol because we were in pain all the time, and you had nothing else, right? You had to have something, you had to work through it. So I think that there's a subset of people, if you give them the right medication, all of a sudden their desire for heroin goes away, and if they still have relatively normal behavior in their brain, work ethic, a desire to have a clean house, a desire to get their family together, the capacity to get a car and do all the normal things, then they will bounce back as long as they get that thing that stops that desire for heroin. Okay. Now, then there are those people where you give that to them and it doesn't do enough. They still desire it. That's one problem. The other problem is there are some people whose just lives are just a mess no matter what you do for them. They're just messy people, even if they weren't addicts. They just make poor decisions. They just like the trauma. It's not that they like it, it's just what they're used to. It's just who they've become. So I think that I think that and I think what happens is you get a cultural development. You know, and it kind of goes back, I'll go back to my father again. My dad, who's a physician, can be woken up in the middle of the night on call, and he'll take a phone call, answer it, he'll be fine. I have a colleague, you call him up in the middle of the night and he has heart palpitates, and he's angry about the whole thing, and he'll rip into a nurse, okay? And he can't help it. That's just the way he is. Now, was it cultural? Possibly. Was it physiologic? Possibly. Probably a combination. So I think what happens is that I think that it goes back that there are no small things. I think that, you know, at some point you still have to put the fire out, but once you've got the fire out, you need to go back and help people to develop better coping skills, work through anxiety, depression, have a normal life, realize that stability matters. And unfortunately, I think some cultures, the cultural development of those people are harmful on top of the fact that they may have a addictive capacity. On top of that, they're being exposed. So I would say that every individual is different, every community is different, every culture is different, and what you do is you look at it straight on and the way I look at it is this: I look at every problem as an opportunity, okay? And then you just have to figure out how do you bring the right game to address that one problem, with the understanding that it's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. You'll probably fail a lot, but every time you fail, it gets you closer to understanding what the heck you're dealing with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, let me go back to one thing you said and ask for some clarification. You mentioned the idea that for some people, their brains aren't so messed up that they could go on Suboxone and return to
Absolute normal.
normal life.
Yeah.
Now, does that imply, though, that some people with their drug use just totally mess up their brains to the degree where they can't return to normal?
I don't really think about that. I don't think about it in the sense of their brain being messed up. Alcohol clearly destroys your brain. Okay. So if you drink enough alcohol, you will the high level of toxicity of that will actually destroy your brain. I suspect that most other drugs, marijuana I think also changes your personality. My gut feeling is that, and LSD for sure, I've known people who've used so much LSD they kind of get psychotic from it. You know, when I've met, I don't think of heroin, cocaine, those sorts of things as that they don't have zero impact. The way I would explain this is this: when I've taken these individuals, when you see them completely off of everything or stable on something, a medicine, they appear mostly normal. It is not, so that's the concept of that little thing is hijacking their desire issue. It is the fact that during that time, they really have arrested development. That's all that, what's destroying them more is not the fact that they have something destroying their brain, which I'm sure it's not helping, but the number one thing is that during that time, that's all they can think about. So it's really, if all you can think about is heroin, you stop thinking about how to take care of your child. You stop thinking about how to pay your bills. You stop thinking about that you just did something illegal because you don't care. So it has more to do with a issue of it's all or none. And that during that time that you're using or not using or you're looking for it, you're undermining normal. And I will tell you that because I've met people who've been on heroin for a long time doing the wrong thing, and as soon as they got either off of all drugs completely or onto medicine, they seem pretty good. So I don't really think that it has to deal with the heroin. You've had enough. Does that sound about right for heroin? That's not so much that it's destroying your brain. It's destroying your life, and that's what's destroying who you are.
Unless there was some kind of
Weird
overdose.
Yeah, if you overdose and you have a toxicity or some sort of the only people I know who've ever had real damage have had overdose where they've had anoxic hits. You know,
Unless you're an adolescent.
I would agree with that. I would think that anything that affects your brain when you're a child does that, and I agree with that. If you were to start early, it distorts the brain, and I think that makes sense. And I'm sure that humans, we all are still maturing. So at some level, I don't want to make it sound like it has no impact, but I think alcohol is actually worse.
And there's a point at which the receptors are so dulled from the huge amounts of neurotransmitters that they no longer produce.
Yeah, I don't want to make. The bottom line is this. I don't want to say it's not there. I'm going to say it's relative to all the other impact. It's subtle. I'm not saying it's not that you don't notice it. I'm just saying, in general, the destructiveness of the act of using and looking for it and not having a normal life and having all that time when your brain is focused on something that is not being used to do the normal thing is probably outweighs the actual use and the in fact, you know, you always have to be a little careful about some of these things. You know, to this day, you will go back in time, and I've had a conversation with this, some of the greatest jazz playing ever done was done on heroin. Okay, some of the greatest producers of music were heroin addicts. And you know, some people will say using LSD and having that kind of framing of the brain, or, you know, my point is using, you know, the energy that goes along with tobacco and stuff like that, there's probably positive aspects to it too that you're getting out of that stuff. So, you know, it's all a game, it's all stuff, but the overall thing is it's just the behavior of destroying your life because that's all you're focused on. It's probably 80% of the problem.
Can I add to that?
Now, by the way, tobacco's different because tobacco destroys your brain, not just, it destroys it by you know, destroying it because of smoke. You know, does that make sense? Like, your body gets destroyed, ages prematurely from smoking. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, you know, with dealing, I grew up with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not with me.
Sure.
I've been very grateful that I've never had to battle it, and so, but I had it all around me growing up.
Sure.
And with my husband's permission, my husband is a recovering alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and my husband's a deadhead,
Mm-hmm.
a hippie,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
a 64-year-old hippie.
Sure.
But like, you know, back in the day, my husband would always, you know, he did, you know, cocaine and not a lot, but cocaine, more marijuana,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you know, and he tried the LSD and the mushrooms and all that, but his was always alcohol,
Sure.
and marijuana,
Yeah.
you know, and I really understand what you're saying, and I believe that, because one of the things I've learned with learning about addictions is what happens is it gets complicated, because that's why I kind of want to focus on psychosocial therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is critical, especially for the heroin addict,
Mm-hmm.
because with that type of therapy, they're getting doses from everywhere. They're getting their case manager, they're getting therapy, they're getting motivational things, you know, which I think is critical, because growing up somewhere, and we talked about this, their environment, it's something there, whether it was their environment they grew up in, I think that can be the key on some of it. But then again, you've got people who grew up in a great environment, but it could also, there needs to be, I think, data and research to show, okay, these people who grew up in this great environment, had everything, you know, great school, great everything, you know, how fast, if they became addicted, how fast did they bounce back? Maybe they're the ones that would bounce back quicker. Who knows? Or the person that grew up poor, in poverty, bad neighborhood, you know, you look at race, different races, you know, what is it there? Are those the ones that stay longer addicted because they have no hope, they have nothing to go, you know, they never had encouragement. They never had anyone healing the inside and telling them, you can do this.
You know, I think you hit on something that I've personally noticed and I've been paying attention to. It's almost like you have different gyroscopes driving your behavior. And one of the gyroscopes is, you know, as I said, this just maybe genetic predisposition to being addicted. Okay, as I said, I have actually my favorite story is my friend and I, when we were teenagers, we got a hold of a bottle of methadone because my in-law was dying, and I tried it. It was the worst experience of my life. As I said, I liked cocaine, but I didn't like the methadone. I took methadone and I hated it. I was there for about 5 hours going, I want off this ride. My friend finished the entire bottle because he just was one of those, he liked everything. So there's an internal drug-driven addiction. Then there's also a driven personality characteristics that are probably on certain psychology. That's the way they're hardwired, that's the way they were built, that's the way they were raised, whatever it is. It's kind of a combination of things that's internal to an individual. No, that's the mu receptor. I'm talking about the personality. I'm talking about the personality that comes from either they were born that way or they were raised a certain way or that combination. But that's the individual psychology. And then you go back to sociology. And very clearly, your neighbor helps determine your life even though you don't even spend time with them. Because that person who got high and came back from wherever knew your brother or your sister. And then it turns out your brother or sister knew a cousin over here who knew that person. And they're all at a party one night, and you just want to fit in, and you're a follower, okay? And you're not really an addict type, but your friend shows up, and they get high one time, and then you just kind of like it because it's in your system. But if you never lived in that neighborhood, you never would have met those 5 people, okay? You know, I grew up in California. The city I went to medical school in was the first city in the country to go smoke-free. It was UC Davis, California. Okay, we rode our bikes to school. I was a medical student. Okay, I'm still here with people I know and love who I want them to quit smoking, and they sit around and smoke cigarettes. It's a cultural thing. So my point is, when you're looking at all these aspects, and what I learned in my training as a family physician in medical school is that you got to look at it from the very big picture, epidemiology, society, culture, people over this thing coming in. Then you kind of zero in on the little family type of thing and maybe, okay, well, let's look at this neighborhood and stuff like that. Then you get down to the individual, you look at the person. Then you get down to the organ level. Then you get down to the physiologic level of the chemistry of that organ, and then you can cut open the organ and get down to the microscopic and look at the actual chemicals. So what you have to understand is there's 1,000 factors. Same thing for resiliency, same thing for vulnerability. Unfortunately, they're not all additive. They're not all equal. Some multiply, some are exponential. Some, you know, it's, you know, the example would be, best example would be, well, I'm a risk taker. I like to ride my ATV, right? So I ride an ATV young because we all ride ATVs in my family. And guess what? We're all alcoholics. And we all have a family history of of addiction. Oh, I got in a major accident. Oh my God, major trauma. I'm in pain. I have to have surgery because it's major surgery. I'm in pain. I get my first pain pill because it's the right thing to do. They're in pain. Unfortunately, I like it. Done. Didn't matter that whether my mom was the right person or not. Didn't matter whether or not I had a good education or not, because guess what? I had trauma, I got pain pills, and I liked it. We're done. That person is on their way towards addiction unless you're able to make sure it doesn't happen. And guess what? They're addicts. And if they keep on getting that pill, because they might need it for a while because they have chronic pain. Now what do you do when you take it away? Oh, well, I can give you this. You're not going to get chronic pain from me because you took too many. You're not with me anymore. Oh, my buddy's got this stuff, you can snort it, it's cheap. I'll give it for free. Now you're a heroin addict. Okay, that story right there, that's 1,000 stories I can replicate. And guess what? Nothing was right, nothing was wrong. It was just all the right person in the right place, or the wrong person in the right place. And that's probably multiplied by 1,000. And then it all reinforces that, because that person right here knows this person right here. And guess what? They're buddies. Or better yet, that person right there is now the girlfriend of this person right there, and they have really good sex when they do drugs. Whatever. My point is, biology, sociology, the reason why your profession requires you to go through so much training to understand so many things is that there's 1,000 reasons why something happens. And what you have to do to win is to find every opportunity you can to put a block in front of it to reduce the likelihood of that happening. So it might be therapy, it might be medicine, it might be the fact that they're so busy going to church all the time, or cooking, or that they're now hanging out with a new crowd, or now they understand what's going on with them. Got it? Or maybe we're using different pain medicine or whatever. Got it?
Well, you have to be careful too, because I know it's with my husband, and my husband and I have had talked about this, because he has told me many times, if it wasn't for the AA 12-step program, which I think that should be incorporated along with so much more.
Sure.
It's that 12 steps in that program that has helped him to where he is now sober. I mean, he still struggles with it, believe me. And he's told me, he says, if it wasn't for that, and he's told me many times he feels I've saved his life.
Yeah, you and in combination.
Yeah, and then he told me also he has to be careful, because when you have an addiction, you tend to, and I think this is what's also critical with therapy too, and being like, even having some sort of a coach there motivating you or something, like a life coach or something, because he said that he tends to go, if he's sober in one area, he'll tend to maybe go to another addiction that might be not healthy for him, which you can do with being an addict. So if there's someone there helping the addict to say, okay, if you want to focus on something, let's focus on these healthy things like Dr. Kalfas talked about. Let's focus on your nutrition, let's go exercise. If you have to exercise all the time, go exercise, your nutrition, let's focus on the healing, the spirituality, so, and focus on more positive things, because with someone who's addicted, I feel it's very easy for them to, I'm a dry sober, but emotionally you're still not sober, and you're wanting, okay, if I'm gonna sober here, I'm gonna become a sex addict, because that's all when you're an alcoholic, you gotta be careful. You tread on thin water, because it is a behavioral change.
I think your description of the problem is accurate. I think you have a good understanding of what I've heard from other people. So what you're doing is that you're being vigilant, and you're on it, and you're and he's interested in doing well. He's at that level of his life where he wants to continue to do well, and he's fortunate that you happen to be probably a hard-headed woman. So anyways, okay. You guys have any questions or thoughts? Still in the nothing? No? Okay.
Any other questions for Dr. Snickle?
why did you get into what was your first step in doing, establishing the heroin impact response team?
You know, so if you look at, it's kind of a good thing for social work. What is the most common form of abuse? Come on, one of the young ones, come on. What's the number one, what is the number one form, specific form of abuse? It's a one word. Neglect. Neglect is the number one form of cause of abuse. Not doing what you're supposed to be doing, not taking care of your senior and making sure, letting your child not have adequate going to school, not giving them food. It's not physically harming them, it's a lack of. Okay. So in medicine, I'm a family physician. I am a general contractor. At this point, I'm a concierge and the cashier. I can't tell you how much it's going to cost, but you have to go through my computer and me to get what you want. So it's like coming to Target, it's like coming to Home Depot and Kroger. I may not be able to do all the plumbing or the electrical work, but if you want to buy something for yourself, it's through me. I came to the realization that heroin was an epidemic. I came to the realization that the medical system had failed to have any capacity to address a greatly needed medical problem. I came to the realization that the medical system was neglecting or abusing the population it was supposed to be taken care of. So what's the number one way to address abuse? Now let's go back to the Catholic. We'll go back to the Catholic lesson. What was the first step in addressing the problems that the Catholic Church had to deal with their abuse? First step.
They hid it.
No, so what's the first step to address it?
Oh. Well, to uncover it.
Exactly. So the first step you deal with any form of abuse is to out it, make it public. Okay, so I had enough understanding of that. Now, so I had to basically say, this is a real problem, and I'm going to out it. We have a heroin epidemic, and we are not prepared to take care of it, and this is why. And let me describe it. Okay, so I understood that. Secondarily, I've had enough experience in dealing with public activities to know that the best analogy is a Pokemon war. You guys remember Pokemon? Remember the little, okay, so you have to create a battle. So internally, I can't do anything, but they can external to me. The whistleblower gets blown up. But when another system puts pressure on the other system and vice versa, then they hedge each other up. So if you look at the big picture, you have different systems within a community. You have agencies that provide services. You have people in a position of governance. These are people who have power, who kind of oversee the whole thing. Sometimes the agencies, like St. Elizabeth is both a governance and a provider of services because it's so big. You have the consumers, and then you have the experts. Most of these things are functioning independently, and there's no interaction. So if you pull them all together in the right fashion, then they're pushing off of each other. And then there's an interaction. You add a little bit of a reporter, a little bit of Facebook, a lot of hot energy. There's nothing more interesting than people dying in your own community, especially when they're pretty and young and they shouldn't be dead, and their grandparents or parents are already ticked off, right? So basically, I just knew, and the final answer to that question is, years ago I was reading a journal called The Economist, and there was a one-pager in there about business, and apparently there was a person who described how to, there's all these different descriptions about businesses and how to run them. And he used 3 phrases: purpose, process, and people. So purpose is, what's your goal? I want to set up a system to provide a wraparound. People, you got to find the right people. They'll create the process. Now, that all works fine if you have money or if you have power. But the phrases that added onto that is motivation. How do you motivate people to play? That comes from knowing people. And then you figure out how they tick, how systems tick. What is it that makes them run? How does the government run? It runs differently from an agency. An individual has different motivations. One individual has a patient, a family member. Everybody has, and that has to deal with, who's watched Pirates of the Caribbean? Okay, by the way, the best people to learn from are heroin addicts, by the way, because they are charming, manipulative. They're very good at this because they are survivors. They do all sorts of things to get what they need. So anyways, do you remember when Johnny Depp was fighting Orlando Bloom in the beginning? So Orlando Bloom is fighting Johnny Depp, right? So the pirate and Orlando Bloom, and then Johnny Depp asks him, Jack Sparrow asks him, whose swords are these? And he says, they're mine, and I've been practicing for 3 hours every day, and I keep them sharp so I can fight you, right? And then Johnny Depp says, very good. And then he throws sand in Orlando Bloom's face, right? And Orlando Bloom's like, hey, that's not fair. And then Johnny Depp says, pirate. Okay, most of these systems have rules. They're set up to maintain the system. That's their focus. Their focus is not to do the work first. It is to maintain the system and do the work. I cheat. I don't play fair. I figure out what my goal is, and then I put people in situations where it has to happen. And the best way to do that is to identify other pirates. And every system that exists has a pirate in it who's been quietly doing their own thing, who survived that system. And all I've done is I've united them all together. And they all know how to manipulate the systems because they're all pirates. Does that answer your question? R. Very good.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So this was the report that came out of?
She did all that. Now, she didn't start it all. There was a whole bunch of people who did work on it. She's the one who cleaned it up and made it legible and made sense, okay? So Jason and I were, Jason, you were before Bonnie, right? Okay, so Jason and I would spend hours upon hours on the phone, and it was the beginning of his kind of move from where he was in his life to where he's kind of shifted, and which has been a good story in itself. Bonnie has been part of the, I would say Bonnie's been in the tower. She's left the tower to hang out with us mere mortals, okay? And she went through an internship that was painful to join. Yeah, and in that internship, it was, but we would speak all the time, and she basically functioned as on her own, without being, wasn't part of her job. She acted as my person who tapped into the agency, organizational stuff, people who could do that game. Jason, in his own right, created what I would say the advocacy side, the people. And, between the two of them and others, we were able to pull in the right elements of agency, governance, advocacy, experts. And through that, everybody started realizing, you know, if we all just start learning what the right thing is to do and discuss it and say this is where the purpose is, and we agree on the purpose, the process starts developing. So it's purpose, process, people, and then as there's one of my old mentors used to say, you look for people with fire in their belly, hungry people. The problem is there's a lot of people who are not hungry, but hungry people, like addicts, can find each other. You just have to learn how to run with each other. That's all. And what happens, what's interesting about that is after you've run with each other, then you go off on a different path, and then all of a sudden you meet at the base camp again. It's like as if you've been running. Oh, what did you catch along? Oh, by the way, I brought this along the way. You know, hey, and it's as if you've been running together the whole time, but you've been doing your own thing. But you're running because the paths are fairly clearly delineated. Doing the right thing after a time is easier than doing the wrong thing.
We learned that in communities, our communities class, and my communities professor, which, you know, he's basically said the same thing. He said, you know, if you want to get something done, and he used fire under the belly. I heard that
Yeah.
too. If you want to get something done, get connected with a judge.
Yeah.
Get connected with someone who's in politics, a politician, a senator, or something.
But I'm going to tell you the problem about politicians is that they are obligated to get reelected. The best thing about community people who are, I'm going to call them statespersons, they're in better position.
I'm going to tell you the real truth about how he got involved. But I have to tell you, a prelude to that is when my daughter was 4, I saw her real personality. I asked her to do something or corrected her or whatever, and she went, well, so Jeremy Engel was treating patients, and he saw hurt, and he saw pain, and he saw a system, medical system, that wasn't responding to it. So he stuck his head out the window and said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
That's about it. That's true. And I did and I saw that movie as a young person also.
So, no, he pulled together a group of people and he was a very strong advocate for it. We would not have had a heroin epidemic or heroin response team if it hadn't been for someone rising up within a medical doctor taking responsibility and